Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Masculinity. This evening I've got a very special host, Dr Maz Idriss originally from Birmingham, but working at Manchester Metropolitan University, where he's a senior lecturer in law and the program director for the LLM program in law and criminology. Maz, welcome.
Hi Asif. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I appreciate it.
Thank you for coming on. It's been a tough year for everyone, particularly lecturers and academics. It's a mixture of working from home and lots of traveling and lots of conferences. And how's it been for you, kind of going back to university after, I suppose, 18 months of working from home?
Yeah, it's been tough. Obviously, people think that working from home is really easy, but when you're teaching students, and you got to change the content, you got to change the delivery, so it can become quite challenging. But September 2021, we've been delivering our courses face to face. But we've had to change the delivery, so we have like block systems where we're teaching students intensely for 6 weeks on a unit, and then they have their 7th week to complete their assessments. Then it's another unit, and so it can be quite intense, it can be quite tiring, and plus I travel to Manchester back and forth from Birmingham. So it's been a tough year, leading the course, leading the masters, teaching students. We're going back to semesters next academic year, so hopefully things will be a bit more easier. But it's been a tough year, but largely successful. I think the students have done quite well. We have some really good results for the students. So yeah, it's hard to carry that on.
So you wear many hats. So you've got a law background, you're a program director. And the reason why we've got you on the call this evening, Maz, is your special interest, which is on male victims of domestic abuse and honor-based violence. So can you tell me, as a 18-year-old Maz who went to university, did this interest start then, or did it kind of develop later on in your kind of more formative academic years?
Really interesting. Obviously, the issues of honor and family reputation is something that I think permeates everybody in some shape or form, especially in South Asian and Muslim communities. Something that I was well aware of in my teenage years. But I think it really started to hit home when I was an academic and I was studying the issue more closely as I became more interested in it. And it basically came to a head when I was in the law library at one of the universities. I was looking for a very mundane article on parliamentary reform. And I opened the journal and there was an article that described honor killings in Pakistan. And I thought, well, what's this? This sounds really, really interesting. And I photocopied it at the time. I read it and I thought, wow, this is really interesting. You got women being killed in the name of honor because they are perceived to have tarnished the family name. And it occurs quite a lot in Pakistan. It's underreported. There's not enough work out there to prevent these types of violence against women and girls. And it's something that is dominated by Islam and Muslim culture, Muslim religion. I said, well, I don't subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to those values. So, I was quite taken aback by that. So I wanted to read more. And then it became quite apparent when I did my research that this is something that permeates all different cultures and religions. And we could have a long discussion that honor killings and honor-based abuse occurs across all cultures, across all religions, all over the world. So it's not just a specific South Asian or Muslim thing. But the transition from violence against women and girls to victims was an interesting development because my PhD was on violence against women and girls. So I studied 8 survivors and 30 key agents to ascertain their views and opinions about what honor-based violence involves. And when I finished my PhD, I asked myself a very important question as a South Asian Muslim male. Had I been a male victim of honor-based abuse or forced marriage, what support networks are there available to me? And it became very apparent that there's not much support network out there. So between about 300 and 400 women's refuges and shelters in the UK, about 10 only for men.
Gosh.
I used to be a trustee of the Elm Foundation, which is a gender-neutral organisation. and they have a male refuge, and they can only house 3 men at any one time. And they were getting calls and referrals for men from London. So they're based in Chesterfield in Derbyshire, so about some 200 miles away. And people from London, men from London, found in a London park, for example, by homeless charities, were referred to the Elm Foundation for support 200 miles away.
That's literally being upsticked just to escape from domestic violence. Men being upsticked, and we know as practitioners and clinicians, family support network is so vital. But if you're being upsticked and uprooted, so almost half the country's length away, gosh, Maz. And when was this? What kind of year was this?
So this was I discovered all of this in around 2017, 2018.
Okay, yeah.
I made an effort to write a co-edited book, an edited book called Men, Masculinity, and Honor-Based Abuse, and that was published in 2020, December. And I invited contributors from the UK and abroad to write about the experiences of men who are victims of honor-based abuse and forced marriages. And then in 2021, February, that was followed by an academic journal article specifically analysing 29 case files from the Elm Foundation on male victims of honor-based abuse and forced marriage. But let me just say, those 29 case files were from a 9-year period between 2010 and 2018. And that is not used to indicate prevalence at all. Because the Elm Foundation only has 3 bedroom spaces for men, they could only house 3 men at any one time, including domestic abuse, sexual violence, trafficking, honor-based abuse and forced marriage. So the 29 case files that I was able to access was only a snapshot in a moment of history and time. And there were many referrals that had to be rejected by the Elm Foundation on honor-based abuse and forced marriage of male victims, simply because there was not enough or sufficient bed space.
Gosh, so 3 beds in and amongst hundreds of beds for women. And I know there's different levels of domestic violence, but just the fact that in a civilized, developed Western nation like the UK, we've only got 3 safe havens, so to speak, for male victims of domestic violence. And I think that speaks volumes. But things changed in the last 5 years then in terms of bed capacity.
So it was 10 spaces that I last said.
Yeah.
The Elm Foundation only has 3 bedroom spaces, and that is a major contrast to the women's refuge that they provide as well. They have a number of bed spaces. They can house a lot of women. I know, speaking to the chief executive officer there, she said that we're looking to build more houses or acquire houses, properties, to house more men. I don't know what the status of that is at the moment.
Right, okay.
But it's an urgent need.
Absolutely. And have you seen a rise in domestic violence and any kind of abuse which has been reported by men during COVID and immediately after COVID? Because we know divorce rates have spiked. There has been increased use of the charity shelter by many women. But in terms of men, has there been an uptick in rates of seeking help for domestic abuse and violence?
I think the Johnny Depp case would have helped put male victims on the map.
Yeah.
With that trial taking place, a civil trial for defamation, that would have sparked interest and made people, in particular men, realise that they can actually be victims. With regards to COVID, the statistics that I have looked at have shown a decrease in individuals, both men and women, accessing support. That's because with COVID, with the lockdown, with the restrictions, they just simply don't have that additional freedom. So they were remaining at home. And so when perpetrators are with the victims, they're watching them, there's coercive control. There isn't that room of maneuver to actually use facilities like computers and things like that, because they're being watched and everyone's in the home. So to give you an example, I think it was in 2019, there was approximately 1,400 referrals to the forced marriage unit, both men and women.
Mm-hmm.
And that was in 2019 and in 2020. This was reported in 2021 last year. There was 759 cases reported of forced marriage.
Right.
So that is more than that, 40% drop.
Yeah.
Drop, and the forced marriage with the Home Office explained the reason why that is a drop is because of COVID, because of the lockdown restrictions.
Okay.
That's going to make it very difficult. It has made it difficult for both men and women to come forward.
Right. Because I know in hospitals, certainly on maternity wards where I've worked, we do put little stickers on the inside of cubicles and toilets to say, look, if you are in danger and it's usually aimed at women. If you are in danger for yourself or for the unborn child, please do mention it to a midwife, and you don't have to mention it directly. The code words which are written on the, I don't know how it ended up in the female toilet. I don't know how, but I think these stickers everywhere actually, and it's kind of if you are in danger. So Maz, looking at the case files that you found over the last 3-4 years, what was the overarching theme which made men present? Because as we know, and we'll talk about this later on, there are many barriers which hinder men from presenting and putting themselves forward. Johnny Depp hopefully will change that narrative, but there are certain barriers of either physical barriers or kind of social barriers. So what were the overarching themes which actually pushed men to seek help and actually get relocated perhaps 200 miles away?
Yeah, so I think it's people recognizing that men can be victims. So I think perhaps one of the reasons why these men came forward was that actually because they were believed. Mm-hmm. They disclosed their abuse to people who worked in the professional agencies, like the homeless charities, like the Foundation. And really, you just made me think about one case. There was a doctor in a hospital, and the male victim presented himself to the doctor with injuries, and he felt really comfortable to talk to the doctor, that male doctor. And the doctor made a referral, and then he was referred to the Foundation. And why was that? Is because that doctor had training about domestic abuse and also male victims. So you can't underestimate the importance of training, understanding, and awareness for individuals who work with the public and are front-facing. So I would say the police, doctors, GPs, nurses, hospitals, places like local authorities, housing associations, all these different local government agencies or quasi-government agencies, they all need to be trained and understand and appreciate the different types of victims. And I think what doesn't help is stereotypical social constructions about an ideal victim. And I'm in no way diminishing the experiences of women, because my research, my PhD, has historically focused on women, and I will always research and advocate for women's rights. But it goes back to my point about when I finished my PhD. I'm a man, and I, identify with anybody who is a victim, and I will support them in their quest to seek justice. And I can't turn a blind eye to anything. That includes men as well. So I am a staunch advocate of human rights and equality. If I see an injustice, and it so happens that I happen to be a South Asian male, I will talk about it, I will research it, and I will make this public, all in the interest of improving people's lives and safety and access to justice. So one of the first key is actually understanding, awareness and training. But also what's necessary is to improve and work upon people's stereotypes, because it's not just victims. And of course, women can be victims of male perpetrated violence. Women may be victims of female perpetrated violence. And similarly, men may also be victims of male perpetrated violence, and also men may also be victims of female perpetrated violence. We need to raise awareness on all these different types of nuances. And it's my task in my research goals and objectives to work on these issues. And at this moment in time, I'm currently working on a project with a couple of academics, specifically looking at Muslim male victims of domestic abuse at the hands of female perpetrators. So I think it's really important to really discuss that, because there's nothing in the literature on it.
Yeah.
So we will be the first to really highlight these particular nuances.
You know, I think my hat's off to you guys, you and your fellow academics, actually raising awareness. But the fact that it's 2022 and nothing's out there in the literature about male Muslim victims and generally South Asian victims of female perpetrated domestic violence against men speaks volumes. And the question I really had, Maz, is yes, there's cultural stereotypes for Asian and Muslim men to act a certain way, to have, these certain caricatures, but how much of that is socially driven gaslighting from, social conventions, which will always, they still persist in these perceptions of men and women. So historically, men have had the upper hand when it comes to financial rights, voting, etc. And then we had the first wave feminism, 60s and 70s, and then radical feminism, second, third wave. How much of that is embedded in our kind of collective consciousness that men, still aren't the victims of domestic violence? Because 100 years ago, they certainly weren't, and now that's still the case. So how much of that is kind of, for want of a better phrase, societal gaslighting?
Yeah, so I think there are certain cultural aspects which have an impact on the way we believe men should operate and behave. And I think, concepts such as masculinity are really important here, because we need to define, what is it like to be a man? So we look at all these different types of media images, films, radio, music, all these different genres and aspects have an impact on how we perceive ourselves and how we think we should behave. Religion and culture also have a major impact. And looking at the issue of honor-based abuse, forced marriage and domestic abuse, there are certain narratives, cultural ideals and values that we should adopt, we're told as men, and that can actually be quite harmful. So things like men need to be the breadwinner, men need big boys don't cry, men don't cry, men certainly can't be victimized by other women. And then you got this notion of hypermasculinity as well, especially within South Asian and Muslim culture. So things like, you need to go to the mosque, you gotta have a big beard, you gotta do loads of weights, and if you do all of that, you're going to be hard, you're going to be tough, and definitely you can't be a victim of domestic abuse at the hands of a female perpetrator. But all of these kind of social constructions about how we should behave and how we should look can have a negative impact, because at the end of the day, as a mental health expert yourself, you will know that we as men have emotions, and there's nothing wrong with crying. There's nothing wrong with feeling depressed. There's nothing wrong with being overcome by one's burdens. But to bottle that in and channel that inside and bury it, that's essentially what we're told to do.
Yeah.
We don't tell anybody about our problems. Men shouldn't talk. So, these are things that we really need to analyze and also perhaps redefine, because for me personally, there's nothing wrong with a man crying. There's nothing wrong with a man asking for help and support. And in no way does that undermine that man's masculinity. And I think masculinity can also be defined in other more positive ways. So if a man does look after his family, that's a really good attribute to have. If a man, respects women, holds honor, those are aspects which I think, demonstrate masculinity. Other examples as well. So, we need to look and analyze the ways in which masculinity is viewed negatively. And we need to look at ways in which we can encourage men to come forward without them thinking somehow they're undermining their masculinity. But there's one particular problem with this, and I think with the issue of female victimization, we've got this issue of masculinity and honor, that you never hit a woman. And I think that's right, that's true.
Yeah.
That in itself can also act as a barrier for men not seeking advice or support, because they say, first of all, men can't be victims. That's a social construction. You can't hit a woman because that's dishonorable and downright disrespectful. That I get. But these kind of understandings will then make men think, well, I can't tell anybody.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, if a man is a victim, if a man is a victim of domestic abuse, whether the perpetrator is a male or female, they should say, well, actually, okay, I'm not going to tolerate this. I'm not going to resort to violence. I'm not going to retaliate, because that's the wrong thing to do. But I will seek support from external organisations who must help me. And that's why I said at the very beginning, external organisations, government organisations need better training and awareness on the types of male victims.
Yeah, exactly. And as someone who's worked in mental health for many years, we have to have this nuanced discussion with our patients who do present to us, like depression, anxiety, social phobias, etc. And then, once you uncover the underlying causes behind that, there might be an element of domestic abuse there. Maz, in your experience, is it true that women will get physically more abused than men by their male partner, and men will get more emotionally abused, perhaps? Does that hold true? Because I know some of these stats from America have certainly shown that, but does that hold true in the West, and in particular the South Asian communities?
It's a really interesting question there. So we're presented with statistics all the time, and one thing we should always be very cautious of is, what does the data not tell us? I think that's a really important question that I ask myself, and also I ask my students to consider as well. So, according to government statistics, 1/3 of domestic abuse victims are men. So that's 33%. That's quite a significant amount now. So I'm really pleased to see that the government are now beginning to see and recognise male victims. In honour-based abuse and forced marriages, we see women being overrepresented in the statistics. So just to give an example, with the forced marriage unit, over successive years, approximately 80% of the referrals are women and 20% are men. But that's still a significant chunk. But we have to ask the reasons. Why is it 20%? Could it be possibly more? And my answer to that is yes, because if we're not actively seeking out male victims, we're not going to report.
Yes.
So while underreporting is true for female victims, it's probably even more true and even worse for male victims, given the notions of masculinity being disbelieved, ridiculed, etc., if they were to come forward. But more increasingly, I think, men are being recognised as being abused in honour-based abuse and forced marriage cases. But we have a problem, and the problem is, if state agencies and other organisations like the police are primarily concentrating on female victims when it comes to data collection, then that means their data is going to be skewed by only emphasising female victimisation. Until we have a coordinated system across the board on male victimisation, honour-based abuse, forced marriages, and other domestic abuse instances, then we're not going to get a reflection or a true picture of the extent of the problem. And my belief is, I've said it in my papers, male victimisation research studies is somewhat 50 years behind female.
Gosh.
So until we consolidate our research on male victims, we're not going to get a true accurate picture. And I think that once we start developing our data collection properly, we're going to see some parity.
Yeah.
My prediction is, my foresight, my prediction is that you're going to see eventually, whether it's 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years time,
50-50.
You're going to see a parity between female victimisation and male victimisation. At the moment, are overrepresented in the figures, and it's true women are abused more, but that's because, what are the objectives, what are the goals of those who are collecting that data?
Absolutely. And that's the whole kind of qualitative data collection, isn't it? So you've got quantitative and qualitative. What gets measured gets managed. And it's the example of police officers. So if they cat littering as an offence, which it can be now, reporting rates go up. It's the whole thing about what gets measured, what gets ticked. The rate to incidents, the perceived incidents will go up. And I did hear something recently saying in some parts of America, the rate is 40% men, 40% of the victims of domestic violence are men, 60% are women, and that's 40% is men underreporting classically. So there will be parity right now if there was better, methods of capturing male experiences.
Absolutely, and even the data that the police provide is nuanced, and we need to really explore what kind of cases they involve. So let me give you an example. A male victim could be calling the police to say, look, I'm being abused by my wife. She's throwing stuff. And then she launches a counter allegation saying that, I'm a victim of domestic abuse. And then he gets arrested as the perpetrator. And the actual female perpetrator in those instances, which I've come across through my research and interactions with victims, is considered to be the victim when she's using the feminist female victim badge, as it were, to elude detection and ultimately prosecution. So when you have those instances, that's also going to affect the data.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, it pains me to say this, but, these things happen. Now, while I believe all victims, including female victims, there will be instances where there'll be women who will mask their true intentions by lodging false allegations against men. And it's those instances that need to be, considered when it comes to skewing of data and statistics. A lot of people won't like what I'm saying. I'll be honest with you. And, people have unfollowed me on Twitter on basis.
I saw that.
Simply because I voice, our victims. And, I will not shy away from it. I don't go on Twitter to make friends. I go on Twitter to link with professionals and to speak about issues which are taboo. And I need to raise awareness. And if it means that people, dislike what I do, then so be it, because I don't do it for them. I do it for the victims. I do it for justice.
And you've got to academic oath almost to have academic integrity and actually to speak about matters which perhaps might not get you funding and might not get you friends and followers, but they actually will, in the long run, make a tangible and indelible impact on victims. And secondly, what you said there, because I remember reading one of your tweets a few months ago, a few weeks ago actually, and I think you retweeted a female lecturer who says, look, we as women have got to stop making someone guilty and making someone innocent purely on their gender. So, domestic abuse, if she's female, she must be the victim. If it's a male, he must be the perpetrator. And she, this was in the wake of the Johnny Depp case, where she said, we must change this social narrative that, depending on your X and Y chromosomes, you are guilty before being proven innocent and innocent before being proven guilty. Now, Maz, I think a concluding question for you, since you've made new friends on Twitter and you lost some friends on Twitter, do you think things are changing now with the very well publicized, very well documented and very well commented Johnny Depp and Amber Heard case?
Yeah, I think things are changing. It's been changing and brewing for quite a while. And I'll say over the last 7 years or so within the last decade, things are changing. And one of the primary reasons for that is the academic work. Now, I'm not trying to, blow my own trumpet, but there are other people out there, other academics, Professor Ben Hine, Dr Liz Bates, who I'm going to be working with.
Dr Roxanne as well, Dr Roxanne, I've come across.
Roxanne Khan, and others as well. And they've highlighted male victimization in different spheres. So that's really important. I can't do everything. I can't change the world, but what I can do, a small amount, is provide that evidence base, because my academic work is all about providing evidence, and so too is pens and Liz's and Roxanne's. So the idea is that if we provide that evidence, if we can show the importance of our work to the public, to interested parties, to the government, that can affect change. And that's the importance of education. That's the importance of academic research, because it helps to put things on the map. And you're going to see an increase over the next 10 to 15 years on research specifically on male victims in all different forms, whether it's sexual violence, modern slavery, domestic abuse, forced marriage, unrelated abuse. I'm certainly going to be working that hopefully until I retire one day, God willing. But together with my female violence against girls work as well, because I'm working currently on projects on that as well. So I want to work on both. That's really important to highlight the different victims. And things are changing. The public perception of who is victim as a result of the Johnny Depp case, will make men come forward. At the Home Office position statement on male victims, I know I criticised that, so did other people at the Men and Boys Coalition and Ali Fogg, for example. They've got the statement wrong in terms of how they define it, but you can see the intention. The CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, the Home Office are beginning to recognise and publish documents about their position in relation to male victims. And that was there 10 years ago. So it's there now. This is a positive, a small step, but a positive step, but we need more change. So I still think we need a separate violence against men and boys strategy, because a male strategy does not exist for men, only for women, violence against women and girls. And currently men are subsumed within that. And by definitional purposes, it's not right. Men are considered separate because they have different issues and different contexts. It doesn't mean that I don't care about female victims. I think we need a separate place and a separate discussion to deal with both differently. There will be overlaps, but there are underlying different issues that affect men differently as they will for women. So we need to respond to that. And secondly, we need more funding and a separate transformation for men to validate men's experiences as victims. And we need to really crank up the funding available for male victims. But the problem is there'll be certain organisations and certain groups who think that we will be taken away from female victims, but that's not our intention. Not my intention.
It's not mutually exclusive, is it? There's no mutual exclusivity. It's like cancer research wouldn't necessarily prevent research on heart disease. They go hand in hand.
Exactly. So you think about the area of health. There's different strands, but no way when you apply for research for cancer are you saying, well, heart disease is not a problem.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that. We're just saying there needs to be better recognition and better funding. At the moment, because we've only got around 10 male refugees, there's not enough support organisations to help male victims, and there's not enough support, specialist support organisations to help Muslim male victims. The cultural, the religious, faith-based abuse, the honour issues that may be presented. You need specialist organisations for that, people who understand the culture. So if they go to a white service, they're not going to get that level of service. So that's why we need, these different areas to develop. But specialist organisations means expense in the government eyes. So what is their priority at the moment? I'm sorry to say, but their priority, even things under the Domestic Abuse Act 2021, it's women. While I don't disagree with that, I can understand why women are important in terms of female victimisation. Minority women are excluded from the Domestic Abuse Act 2021. There's no recourse to public funds. It was debated in Parliament that policies should change, but the Conservative government said no, we're going to maintain the status quo. But that same policy also affects men, because I've come across cases in my case files where men were married to British-born female Muslims and brought over from Pakistan, but they're treated like modern-day slaves because they're on a spousal visa. They have no recourse to public funds. So I call the police 9 times, I'm being abused. The police don't come. And then when the police do come, they act as the immigration police, saying to those male victims, you're only making up these allegations because you want to stay in the UK, you want permanent residency. So, you've got this double, triple victimization. They're being victimized by the families, by the spouses, by their wives. They're victimized by state agencies, like the police, being disbelieved, ridiculed. And they're victimized by government policies that don't allow them to have recourse to public funds. So what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, it's almost like a multiple jeopardy, we call that in medicine, when you've got an abuse against you, then you've got the hospital investigation process, then you've got the police investigation process, then you've got the General Medical Council. So we call that multiple jeopardy, and in terms of law and medicine. And you can just imagine, especially if someone's new to the country, and they're actually fearing for their lives or fearing for their mental health, and they're getting abused either physically, financially, in many cases, as well as emotionally abused, and they've got no recourse to help. And when they are seeking help, they're gaslighted, just like you quite plainly put it there. And that's really saddening to hear, Maz. And I think people like you, we commend you, we take our hats off to you, and we just hope this kind of your work, grassroots work that you're doing, this foundational work, does filter its way to the top, and policy can be changed, and ripple waves can be made whereby people do not only raise awareness, but have a greater insight and recognition that men are just as likely as women to experience abuse, but much less likely to actually report it. Therefore, if you look at it on the face, we need to put a lot more funding into men's services because they're very underdeveloped.
Yeah, let me just go back to my first statement when I said the male victim who was on the park bench in London, he was in the UK, he was in the UK on a spousal visa, but he was being abused by his wife and his in-laws. So he had no recourse to public funds because he was on spousal visa. Yeah. So he lived on a park bench for 3 days. And then the homeless charity was walking through the park and spotted him. And then they made a referral to the Elm Foundation, who then had to use their own funds to support him and get him back into education and sort his life out. He's got permanent residency now, but that was because of the intervention of the Elm Foundation. But how many cases of men are like that in the UK because they don't have recourse to public funds because of the lack of a male refuge space? And this is what we're going to continue to see. And I think even, the cost of living crisis is only going to exacerbate that because they can't afford their own accommodation. So you're going to see more and more people being made homeless and resorting to living in parks and other places like that just to survive. So it's a really desperate and serious situation, which undoubtedly is going to affect their mental health and also perhaps even their suicidal thoughts.
Yeah, because we know, especially if you've even relatively recently married, you probably will be under the age of 45, and then we know that's the biggest killer of men in the Western world. In not heart disease or cancers or road traffic accidents, but it actually is suicide. Under 45 is the biggest killer of men, and that trend is not abating. It's getting worse and worse, and COVID has really widened the gaps. And a big part of that is men. Particularly in my work in mental health, men feel like they don't have an outlet for mental health. We can't speak about depression, anxiety, because it's not manly. So imagine domestic abuse and domestic violence. They're even less likely to speak about it because it's considered even less manly. But I'm really hoping things have changed. Johnny Depp's a famous actor who was actually 20 years senior to his ex-wife, and if he can actually experience abuse within a marriage and gaslighting and defamation against him, then your average Joe who's been through the same thing can hopefully come forward. And the work you're doing, Maz, and your colleagues across the board, particularly in minority communities, is commendable, and I take my hats off to you. And I wish people wake up, particularly those in positions of power, in terms of funding, in terms of resource allocation, and the guys who are in charge of university grants and funding. I know things have been affected for academics post-Brexit with certain European development research funds, etc. But I do hope academic your work flourishes and you get a greater body of evidence so policy can be affected from top down.
Yeah, I hope so too, and that's what we're trying to do. All we're trying to do is improve awareness raise awareness, have an impact on policy development for the betterment. But I'm in a privileged position because the work that I do, I teach my students, and I know my students will go out into practice. And then right now, I'm supervising a master's student who's doing a dissertation on honor-based abuse and forced marriage on male victims. And she's a practice solicitor. So this is the impact that we have. We can't underestimate what we as academics do, because there are really engaged students out there who will learn about this. And one day, if they're working in the family courts, the criminal courts, they're going to be saying, I remember Maz's lecture supervising me. I remember Maz's article. Got to help this guy. That's what we're trying to do.
No, that's, it starts at the grassroots level. And I can tell you as a doctor, I was, heavily involved in a push to get nutrition taught at med school, because we wanted tomorrow's doctors to be savvy regarding lifestyle medicine, health, not just medicine, life, health and wellness, not just medicine. So now, thankfully, in the last 5 years, the nutrition is compulsory in medical school curriculums, because a lot of things can be prevented with good nutrition. Same in law, Maz, actually raising awareness in your LPC and your LLMs, and hopefully your BVCs and all these kind of postgraduate qualifications that you do, and even your LLBs, undergraduate degrees. If you can raise awareness and have a module on it, not just an optional module, but a compulsory module on male victims of honor-based violence, male victims of domestic abuse. So when your solicitors, barristers, family court lawyers, when they eventually practice family medicine, family law, they can actually, have a nuanced approach and a more layered approach to what they see in front of them.
We kind of do that already. So I've been working at Manchester Met for 6 years now. So I teach across all the courses at all levels. So it's 400 law students in the first year. I've taught them forced marriages, honor-based abuse. I teach on the master's course. There are 70 students there. PC students, we have 200 students there as well, and even third year students. I used to run a unit called criminology and law. So I'll teach the students there honor-based abuse, forced marriages, and also male victims as well. So now the potential access to students is great, but there's a problem. If I was at Manchester Met, we would be teaching this, and that's the problem. We need to, diversify our content and make sure that we discuss issues about law, society, and the impact that laws can have on people, and issues that affect law and policy. But unfortunately, it's left to people like us to incorporate it within our curriculum, because we happen to have a research interest. I would like there to be wider policies on education and raising awareness on domestic abuse, honor-based abuse, forced marriages, and also female and male victims. We're trying to work on that now. I'm speaking to the people higher up in the university about this so that we can support our students and also our staff as well, because the staff are at the front line of teaching students, and they will be in contact with students who are experiencing this. Now, in 2 years before COVID, I had 4 students declare to me that they were experiencing forced marriages or potential forced marriages. And that's me, as a law lecturer, talking about honor-based abuse and forced marriages, and girls come up to me, all female. What will happen if there's other schools?
Yeah, exactly.
Other departments. It's going to happen there, but do they know what to do? I'll probably say no. They're probably culturally unaware. And I've been to other universities where I've given lectures. I was talking to staff as well there, and they say to me, "Oh, Maz, I need to know more about this." And they've, politely, and perhaps with a little bit of embarrassment, highlighted their ignorance of these issues. And I'm thinking, oh, we live in the 21st century. You got to be really savvy about these issues affecting your students. And if you don't know things like what Ramadan and Eid means, how the hell are you going to know what honor-based abuse and forced marriage involves?
Exactly.
And these are interactions I've had with other members of staff at other universities. So it's a really wide issue.
It is, and the whole gulf in knowledge needs to be bridged. And like I say, Maz, continue doing your great work, and hopefully this can filter down to even younger than students at university and people actually in their formative years of education, and things can get picked up. And thank you for coming on the podcast. It's been great having you. You know, we spoke a few months ago, and I was intrigued by your tweets because, you know, something which I've come across as a doctor. I have seen men come to me and confide in me, being a Muslim, being an Asian doctor, about their home situation, their domestic life. And actually, one of my patients did, you know, unfortunately about 2 years ago, did take his own life, quite a young guy. And, you know, I felt as a doctor, I felt guilty. I felt guilty about this. I did everything I could. But then as doctors, you kind of move to different places, you know, different cities and different practices. I only found out in the news, actually. And that kind of really reignited my interest in mental health, particularly within the institution of marriage. When I came across your tweets, I thought, yeah, he's an academic, but he's actually, he writes like one of us, you know, he writes like a millennial. So let me get him on the podcast. He's not your typical grey-haired academic who's hard to reach.
I think we're turning very slowly.
No, you've got many more years, God willing, in terms of your academic prowess anyway. And best of luck with everything going forward. I do look forward to reading the book. Is it available on Amazon?
Yeah, it's available. It's available to rent and buy, so don't waste your money, just rent it.
I'll give it a read because, you know, like, masculinity is one of my, you know, kind of interests. Looking at crisis of masculinity, you know, as a doctor, and you know, we are having this kind of continuum spectrum from fragile masculinity to toxic masculinity, healthy masculinity, and we're getting variations of that. And I think things, you know, the Johnny Depp case have kind of changed the narrative with regard to what men can and can't do in terms of coming forward. So that's been interesting, and hopefully your work gets more traction, gets more coverage, and we can change the narrative and then hopefully change policy in time for actually more men to be saved.
That's great. Yeah, thanks for the invite. I appreciate you taking an interest in my work, and you know, long may it continue, inshallah.
No, brilliant. Thank you, Maz. Thanks a lot. Have a great evening. Enjoy the sunshine. Thank you.
Have yourself. Take care.
Thanks a lot. Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.